John Steppling is an author and commentator joining us. John Steppling, at this point, we're looking at one day to be over, and the continuation of talks have been confirmed and are happening. But what Iran has said over here is that it's not going to come into full compliance until all the U.S. Sanctions are removed. Do you think ultimately that's what's going to happen?
No, I don't think it's what's going to happen. But you know, this is all, as I've said before, kind of perception management, and you know, the real issue is, what is Biden's foreign policy going to look like, and is it somehow going to be different from Trump's? And everybody that voted for Biden apparently wants to believe this, but you have to look at the fact that the other day he targeted Russia and called them, you know, an aggressor, and he moved troops into, you know, the Eastern Europe. He has a problem with Bolivia, which was democratically elected government that got rid of the fascists that he was behind. He was one of the architects of the war against Yemen. He remains close with Mohammed bin Salman. He obviously remains close with Israel and the leadership there. None of these offenses, the far right extremist government in Poland, for example, he thinks is perfectly fine, but he will single out Iran as somehow behaving as a rogue nation and not part of the international community, and all of this rhetoric that the U.S. has employed for 40 years, and it's entirely preposterous. So it becomes hard to answer these questions because it's based on illusion and lies, and you have one side of the discussion, the United States, that simply lies habitually. Nothing they say is true, and they change history, you know, at a moment's notice. They will suddenly decide something didn't happen or something did happen. And so when we're talking about Iran, we have a 70-year history in which the United States has lied. This is the country that assassinated Gaddafi and reduced Libya to a failed state, waged war in Iraq, is bombing Syria, wants to get rid of the very popular Assad government, and you know, this is, and the reasons they come up with, of course, are ludicrous, and it's the same here. I mean, it was the United States that tore up the JCPOA. It's the United States that has reneged on countless agreements and promises. And the very fact that Iran has to justify a nuclear program when, for example, Israel doesn't, is never brought up. It's never part of what mainstream media covers or asks about. So on some level, it's just this continuing demonizing of Iran. That's the role it plays, and I don't think that's going to change.
Well, you talk about how the U.S. lies, and I'm looking at a quote by Robert Malley, who's the Iran envoy. I'm sorry, the U.S. envoy for Iran, and he has said that the U.S. knows that in order to get back into compliance, I'm quoting him, it's going to have to remove sanctions that are inconsistent with the 2015 deal. Do you think that he's lying there?
Well, yeah, the sanctions, you know, are illegal. They were illegal from the beginning, but that hasn't stopped the U.S. historically from employing sanctions and blockades. And the most famous example was, of course, Madeleine Albright's comment regarding Iraq, that, you know, 500,000 children was worth it. That's how the United States thinks. And you know, whatever you read in the West, there's always a perspective that is left out, and that's the perspective that of the U.S. as an imperialist nation, that it is in fact the international aggressor, not anybody else. And so Iran has nothing to prove. Iran didn't do anything. It hasn't committed any crimes. It hasn't reneged on promises. It hasn't violated treaties or agreements, nothing. So they don't have anything to answer for. It's the United States that does.
Thank you for that, John Steppling, author and commentator there from Indoroy.